We all know the Edmonton Oilers are likely riding with Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard, at least till mid-season. That's not stopping us from ranking the most absurd and maybe the most plausible replacements around the NHL.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming October will be my 4th NHL season as a host with the Locked On Podcast Network and my 10th doing digital hockey content. And I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your teams covered every single day. And today's edition of Locked On Oilers is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So on today's show, we are going to be power ranking the plausible replacements for one of Calvin Pickard or Stuart Skinner. So let me preface this episode by laying it out for you. We are going to start with the guys that Stan Bowman could not get with a ski mask and a shotgun. Not even if they held the other team up would the Oilers be able to acquire these players. And we're going to work the scale from there. Guys the Oilers absolutely cannot get to guys that maybe they could get, to guys they could get, to guys they would not want. And believe me, as bad as you think the Oilers goaltending situation is right now, there are guys around the league, there are teams who are in worse positions than the Oilers are in net. So to start things out, as we have established, as we have talked about in depth, the everydayers at this point know every single starting goalie around the NHL. They know all the backups at this point around the NHL because we've spent most of the summer addressing the fact that Stan Bowman has not replaced one or both of Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner. We have framed this idea around the devil you know being better than the devil you don't know. That, yes, Calvin Pickard, Stuart Skinner, extremely unreliable. Guys you would not bank on, guys you do not feel particularly comfortable about in a big game, in a Stanley Cup final. And Stan Bowman has opted, rather than spending the money to upgrade the goaltending room, he feels the Oilers are better off paying for an extra forward or an extra defenseman. And one of the considerations we're going to get to a little later in the episode are guys the Oilers could acquire, but likely would require significant roster surgery if they were to pursue. So, starting out with guys the Oilers absolutely, unequivocally cannot get. I have a handful in this category. I have Igor Shesterkin, Andrei Vasilevskiy, Jake Oettinger, Sergei Bobrovsky, Connor Hellebuyck, and Ilya Sorokin. Now, Shesterkin, Vasilevskiy, Oettinger, Bobrovsky, Hellebuyck, those guys are all on teams that expect to make the playoffs this upcoming season. The Rangers desperately need to bounce back. Chris Drury is absolutely on the hot seat in New York now. Trading Igor Shesterkin now, after giving him the huge extension as opposed to last year, delaying the inevitable would not be a good look on him. Andrei Vasilevskiy, as long as Tampa Bay has Nikita Kucherov, they will continue to go for it. They have reorganized their roster a number of times since their back-to-back cups. They are very much still trying. Jake Oettinger and the Stars are very much the Oilers' contemporaries for potential Western Conference champions. The Stars will not be trading a franchise caliber goalie, somebody who has a reasonable chance of being the backup on Team USA come next year's Winter Olympics. Sergei Bobrovsky, last year of his deal, the Panthers are going for a three-peat. They will not be moving him. Ilya Sorokin I put here just because I don't think the Oilers have the means to acquire Sorokin from an Islanders team that's likely going to undergo a facelift of sorts that's going to try and reorient their team around the younger pieces, get cheaper, and try and figure out what the next look for that team is. And Connor Hellebuyck, very similar to what we said about Shesterkin, what we said about Jake Oettinger, Vasilevskiy. The Jets are still going for it. I know they lost Nick Ehlers. I know they have a little more uncertainty in their roster than they've had in years past, but I really struggle to see a world where Connor Hellebuyck would become available in a trade, especially within the Western Conference. I think if it gets to that point where the Jets would consider it, I think he'd almost certainly be going to the other conference. Now, I have an addendum here that is titled Not in Cold Hell, and that's for Dustin Wolf. as much as I love the young American netminder, the Calgary Flames will not be trading a potential franchise goalie in Providence. There's too much beef. There's too much animosity there. You could not sell that to that fan base. And frankly, Dustin Wolf is going to be probably the face of whatever the next successful contender iteration of the Flames comes down the pipe. Next, I have Linus Ullmark. The Senators took a step last year. They made the playoffs. They were pretty good in that Leaf series for what their talent was. I felt the Senators played a reasonable playoff series, and Ullmark's in the first year of a new deal. I think if the Senators take a massive step back, if they flop, maybe this is something we could talk about in the summer, but at the price point that Ullmark is coming in at, I just don't think the Oilers have the means to make it happen without significant roster surgery. And then I have two more subcategories within this group. I have Jacob Markstrom, who, look, if the Devils agree to trade Markstrom, they've punted, and they have Jack Hughes, they have Bratt, they have Luke Hughes, they have Dougie Hamilton, they have Nico Hischier. The Devils desperately need to make the playoffs if Tom Fitzgerald would like to keep his job. I would argue he probably needs to win a playoff round, if not two, for Tom Fitzgerald to stay general manager of the Devils. So I don't see a world where the Devils would do that. Now, I have three guys in this category, and I've titled Young Player Not Going to Be Moved. I have Askarov on the Sharks, I have Spencer Knight in Chicago, and I have Lucas Dostal in Anaheim. All three of those guys are poised to be key cogs in rebranding and reiterations. You know, the Blackhawks have long been looking for a Corey Crawford replacement. They have rotated through a litany of netminders. Spencer Knight, somebody who has worked through some personal struggles, who has dealt with a lot of off-ice adversity, self-imposed type thing, where he has worked through some serious mental health issues and come back and is poised to be a significant piece in whatever a Connor Bedard-led Blackhawks team is as a contender. And then Lucas Dostal, the Ducks want to make the playoffs this year. Pat Verbeek is feeling the heat. He brought in Joe Quenneville. They brought in a lot of guys over the last 2 or 3 years to get here, and now they're going to be waiting for their young guys to take leaps and put them in a position to make a jump from an 80-point team to, say, a 95, 100-point team that's going to get back in the playoffs. It's not out of the realm of the possibility. If the Ducks have a good year, they could play their way back into the postseason, and I don't think the Oilers are going to be able to swing trades in division just because of the nature of the NHL and how territorial and, frankly, adversarial teams within division are. And then the last guy I have in here is someone who's locked in. I don't think the Avalanche have serious interest in moving Mackenzie Blackwood. They spent last year trying to fill that goalie position on the fly. You know, they bring in Blackwood, they remake the goalie room in season, and I think Blackwood, really strong amateur profile, had a really good first year in the NHL with the Devils, and then it entirely fell apart for him. He had a nagging injury that didn't really heal right. He played through it. He didn't have good numbers with the Devils. He got traded to San Jose, effectively left for dead in San Jose, and he bounced back very nicely for Colorado. Now, I am skeptical of Mackenzie Blackwood as a high-end starter. I don't think he's good enough to win a Stanley Cup, but he's an average NHL goalie if everything's going right for him. And with NHL average goaltending, that would be better than what the Oilers presently have. But I also just don't think the Avalanche are going to be particularly interested in trading a guy in division who is not in division, trading a guy in conference who they just went through a lot of work to get through. And then you're just going to trade him a year later. And then I have one more in this group. I have Darcy Kemper, who I think is pretty good. Darcy Kemper's won a Stanley Cup. He's been a fringe Vezina guy a couple times. He's been top 12, 10 for a good chunk of the last few years. Didn't go well that first year in Washington, lost the job to Charlie Lindgren, got traded to LA for Pierre-Luc Dubois, played really well behind a strong defensive team in LA, and I think Darcy Kemper would be an upgrade from what the Oilers have. I just don't think the Kings are going to trade him in division to the team that's beat them in the postseason X number of years in a row. I think the only way that works is if the team entirely falls apart. I know they've got new leadership in there in Ken Holland. I think Ken is going to very aggressively try and keep them in the playoff mix. I know we all like to make fun of CC, Dumoulin, Corey Perry bringing the unction to LA, but he's trying to get them into a deep playoff run. He wants to get them past the Oilers. I would imagine there's a personal point of pride there that if he could beat the Oilers with the Kings for the first time after 4 straight losses for the Kings, it would mean something to that organization, but I don't think you would see that happen. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, and when we come back, I'm going to tell you guys the Oilers probably can't get, but it's not impossible, right after this break. Most people can't name all their financial accounts, or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is the tool for you. Monarch does all of the heavy lifting. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever opening a spreadsheet. Something I am definitely, and most younger people are guilty of, is not putting enough money aside, whether it's for emergencies, for big purchases, or for retirement. And Monarch helps lay everything out for you in one straightforward plan to get to your ideal financial goal. Do not let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year subscription. One more time, it's that good a deal. 50% off your first year subscription at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are making our way through yet another goalie conversation. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. We are almost there, folks. We're maybe 2 weeks away from the start of preseason skates, getting guys in for testing, and starting to get an idea of training camp battles. And we here at Locked On Oilers will be back to 5 days a week next week, and I very much look forward to setting the table. We will do in-depth previews of every player, of every position group, of the coaching staff, of the changes to the staff. We will lay out key storylines for the upcoming season, threads within those storylines for you to tug on, for you to ruminate on, so you know what's going on. So, continuing our goalie conversation, let's talk about guys the Oilers almost certainly can't get, but are more plausible than those we discussed in the first segment. So, within this group, I have unlikely, but not impossible candidate number 1, Jeremy Swayman. Now, Jeremy Swayman makes a lot of money, makes more than $8 million per year. The Oilers would need to perform significant roster surgery to accommodate a player at that cap hit. We know the Oilers are going to need to account for at least a $3 to $5 million increase in Connor McDavid's average annual value, and they are not going to be in a position to be taking on significant salary without shedding further salary. Yes, the salary cap is going to go up in the not so distant future, and that will mitigate some of the Oilers' cap problems. It will not solve all of them. The Oilers are a team that is up against the ceiling, that arguably could stand to shed another bottom of the lineup player to cut costs even further to give them more breathing room going into the season. But there is a non-zero chance that the Boston Bruins in the next year or two entirely bottom out. There's a non-zero chance the Bruins pick first overall next year and take Gavin McKenna. Jeremy Swayman is in the prime of his NHL career. He did not have a good first season with this new contract. He did not participate in training camp or the preseason. He worked out separate from the team, did not put himself in a position to succeed, and was playing from behind effectively the entire way. I think if the Oilers really wanted to put themselves in a position to contend for an extended period of time, putting chips in on a young goalie who has elite ceiling the way Swayman does, great amateur goalie, somebody who was incredible for the United States in the World Juniors a couple years ago, somebody who was tremendous in a 1-2 tandem with Linus Ullmark the year the Oilers set the record for points in a regular season in this present format, and somebody I think has the capacity to start for Team USA in the Olympics, not necessarily next year, but 2030 when Swayman would be 31 years old. I think there's a reasonable chance he would be one of the candidates alongside Jake Ottinger. And yes, it would cost the Oilers a lot, not just in cap space, but in assets. And the Oilers, of course, do not have a robust prospect pool. They don't have a ton of their draft picks. The goalie market is famously fickle. It is hard to get fair value or know if you are paying fair value for a goalie just because of how situation and environment dependent they are. But if you really wanted to swing things, if you really wanted to send a message about the direction of your team, getting someone like Jeremy Swayman in the prime of their career, who's got 7 years remaining on a long-term deal, that is a gamble. And the more risky your situation, frankly, as a general manager, the more you are incentivized to gamble, to keep pushing chips in, keep burning draft picks, keep burning prospects, because you are running out of leeway. You are running out of options. The next goalie I have in this tier is Filip Gustavsson of the Minnesota Wild. Gustavsson is a pending unrestricted free agent. He will be a free agent next July 1st in that McDavid, Eichel, Kaprizov class. I think the Wild very much would like to make the playoffs this year. Bill Guerin would like to get that team going in the right direction. They have been kind of in the weeds here for the last couple seasons, figuring out the coaching situation, clearing the cap recapture penalties for buying out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. They are a team that desperately needs to start making progress. Kaprizov is not getting any younger. They have a nice group of young pieces like Matt Boldy. I know Brock Faber did not have a great second year in the league, but I think he will bounce back to some degree and perform at a reasonably high level. Zuccarello and Eriksson Ek are still kicking around. The only way this makes sense is twofold. One, if they stink, if Minnesota's bad, and Bill Guerin is trying to salvage anything from next year beyond extending Kaprizov, which has to be his top priority, which has been a major topic of conversation in NHL circles over the last couple months. There's a world where they trade Filip Gustavsson at the deadline for a bundle. And of course, the Oilers do not have a ton. I think there's a world where if you're the Oilers, you trade for Filip Gustavsson, you effectively audition him on your team, and then based on how that goes, how much he likes it, you could then consider giving him an extension before he leaves. You know, think of it as a try it before you buy it, an internship type deal for Filip Gustavsson. Next up on this list, I have a few guys. We're going to have to go a little bit faster because I've been dragging a little bit because there's a lot to talk about here and we're trying to hit as many of these goalies as we can. Next up, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen / Devin Levy / Alex Lyon. The Sabres have 3 NHL goalies. Devin Levy, who has a tremendous amateur record from his time at Northeastern as a Husky, a really good college hockey season under his belt a couple years ago, has struggled to stick at the NHL level. He was really good in the A last year. He currently is listed in the AHL. Alex Lyon, they signed in free agency, somebody I had pointed as maybe a target for the Oilers to at least be a backup to Stuart Skinner, someone who I think is a little bit better than Calvin Pickard. But they have 3 goalies. I think if you're Buffalo and you want to throw caution to the wind and you want to put your chips in on Levy, great, trade Pekka Luukkonen. I think if you want to ride Pekka Luukkonen and have him be your goalie of the medium-term future, you could get a nice return for Devin Levy if you're the Buffalo Sabres. So that's one we've identified and we've revisited a lot. Ditto for Sam Montembeault, Jacob Dobyshev, really similar situation in Montreal where Montembeault has played reasonably well, you know, somebody who's on the outskirts, maybe a 3rd or 4th goalie for Team Canada in the Olympics, someone who has okay NHL results, playing in front of Jacob Dobyshev, who has been a pretty good backup in spurts, very young, very unestablished at the NHL level, someone who probably wouldn't cost as much assets-wise and somebody who wouldn't cost as much against the cap, likely makes him a more compelling target for the Oilers. But these are guys who are not impossible. We could put Freddie Anderson and Peter Kochetkov in here. You know, the Carolina Hurricanes have been very reticent to give goalies money. They think they can recreate quality goaltending in the aggregate, playing strong defense, playing strong possession in front of them. And part of the reason they haven't broken through, Freddie Anderson's limitations. If they feel they're ready to turn the reins over to Kochetkov, Anderson is a pending unrestricted free agent. Anderson does have quite the injury history, which would give me a bit of pause if I were the Oilers, but I would not be opposed to Freddie Anderson or Peter Kochetkov. But I think if the Hurricanes were to move either of those guys, it would almost certainly be Freddie Anderson, though I think they're going to be very content to ride both and then let Anderson leave in free agency in the summer. I have John Gibson and Cam Talbot here. If Detroit absolutely falls on its face, I could see them looking to blow it up and maybe entirely reinvigorate the organization, change from Steve Yzerman, really put themselves in a position to figure out what the hell they need to do to get out of the purgatory they've been in for the better part of the last 5 to 10 years. I think I would put Cam Talbot in a similar boat. Look, if Detroit's out of it come deadline time and you offer a third, and even a third probably seems like a lot for a backup goalie in this environment, I think you could get Cam Talbot. Now, this is not the Cam Talbot of 10 years ago who started 72 games, who's got the best Oilers goaltending season of the last 10 years. I don't think you would expect a lot from Talbot. I think he is a higher floor than Pickard. I don't think you would feel confident in him as a bell cow starter, especially in the postseason, but he's doable. He's attainable. And that's really the trick here. When we are in the weeds to this degree, he is doable. He is attainable. I think you could put Jordan Binnington in this boat as well. Somebody who's got a pretty good resume, Stanley Cup, 4 Nations, and it'd be funny if the Oilers and Blues squash their beef by trading a goalie. I think the Blues very much going to stay in the mix, though. I think Jim Montgomery's successes with them last season prevent him from being moved on. I think Joey Daccord not getting traded in division, but at least a little more likely than some of the other considerations. I think Thatcher Demko falls in this boat as well, where if Vancouver entirely stinks, it's not implausible. But we are going to take our second and final break. We'll hit on the guys that you don't want the Oilers to trade for, 1 or 2 guys that I would be open to them trading for, and then guys I didn't know what box to put in. Coming up next. The NFL season starts tomorrow, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love using FanDuel because it makes however you want to play fast and easy. If you want to bet before the game starts, if you want live betting after kickoff, or if you want to cook something up with your friends on a same-game parlay, all are in the FanDuel experience. FanDuel is a quick and easy way to add a little bit more juice to your football Sundays. So, FanDuel has one question. Are you ready? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. It's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, the eve of the NFL season kicking off. Eagles Cowboys. Very much glad to have football back in my life. Football just does something for my brain in a strategic way. And I use football a lot in my metaphors when I'm talking about players, positional value, because I think it's the sport we might have ironed out most of the inefficiencies in our roster construction, what we choose to spend money on, positional value in a way that the other sports necessarily haven't. I think that's in part because football is so specialized when you have 11 different players. Yes, there are multiple wide receivers and tight ends and tackles, but right tackle versus left tackle, inside versus outside receiver, blocking tight end versus slot tight end. There are so many niches within those specialized skill sets that it makes it really difficult to not get lost in the weeds and really difficult to generalize. And I think hockey, we are trying to get more specialized in our positional understanding, to put guys in positions to be their best versions of themselves. And I think goalie is inherently tied to that idea. I think goaltending is the last frontier in understanding hockey as far as underlying numbers go. And that brings us to a group of guys who, very similarly to some of the people we've discussed before, probably not doable, but it is worth mentioning. I would put Karav in here from the Utah Mammoth. He was the guy I was banging the desk for most of last February and March leading up to the trade deadline. I thought Vejmelka was easily the best goalie available. Utah, though, thinks they're ready to compete for a playoff spot. If you're ready to compete, you're not going to trade a starting caliber goalie when there are so few in the league. As we've discussed, starting goalies are a lot like quarterbacks. Even if your team stinks and you're probably better pivoting towards the next iteration, the next contender window, you're not going to move on from your quarterback until you're absolutely sure you need to, just because they're so hard to come by. I think you can also put You can put Logan Thompson in here. I think you can put Charlie Lindgren in here. Whichever Capitals goalie you like less, I think you can put in here. I don't love either guy as a franchise and number one goalie. I think a lot of what Logan Thompson did last year, Charlie Lindgren did 2 years ago, is a product of the environment. I think Washington, especially last year, took good steps as a team, better defense, more possession, scoring more, less reliant on defense. Now, one big fish we have yet to address, someone who I think we should revisit that we talked about a little bit briefly, and someone I think is worth talking about a little bit heavier. Juuse Saros. I know the Oilers don't have the money. I know it would require finding a way to move Darnell Nurse or getting rid of like 3 more or 2 more roster players. I think if you are the Oilers, and you really are committed to trying to win in the next 2 years, which you have to be. If you get McDavid for 3 or 4 years, your next 2 years are effectively your window. Because after those 2 years, it starts becoming about the next window of contention. After those 2 years, it starts to become about what's the next McDavid contract look like when he's 33? Do the Oilers still have a team around those guys? Have they replaced Hyman, Ekholm, Nuge? The Oilers do not have a lot nailed down into that medium and long-term future. You got a handful of guys. You're optimistic about, say, Savoie or Ike Howard. But if you really want to go, you need to upgrade this goalie position. The candidates are not great. We spent 30 minutes last week leading up to talking about Laurent Brossoit, who's a career backup, somebody whose career high in games started in a season. I think he's 21, if I remember correctly. I'm going to pull up his hockey reference right now. Bad job by me not writing it down. But yeah, Laurent Brossoit's career high in starts in a season is 22. He has really good numbers, a 911 save, a 264 goals against. Those are really solid. You also have to remember that Brossoit has been on pretty good teams in Winnipeg and Vegas, especially in terms of their team defense. And it's hard to distill how he would perform away from those environments. He's also coming off of pretty significant injury his last season in Chicago, where he is currently one of the 3 goalies under contract. I suppose you could potentially look at one of the alternatives if that's Soderblom, the other young Chicago goalie. I think if you are the Oilers and you really want to convince McDavid you're in, you got to go get a real goalie. I think anytime you're telling a great player like that, hey, we're going to get this right. It might take a little while, but we're going to get this right. And you run back the same goalie tandem twice and they are uninspiring of confidence. I understand why McDavid's a little hesitant to sign, or he hasn't signed yet. And while McDavid and the Oilers' interests may not always be in alignment, McDavid might be prioritizing different things than the Oilers. I do think getting this goalie situation rectified would do a lot as far as squaring those two away and getting their interests in alignment. I don't think McDavid is holding the Oilers' feet to the coals about getting a third or a replacement goalie for one of Pickard or Skinner in here, but he would have every right to. It would be perfectly within reason if Connor McDavid told Stan Bowman, you need to get another goalie in here. And we ran through pretty much every starter in the NHL. We hit on a couple of the backups. Do you really want Tristan Jarry? You want Ilya Sorokin, excuse me. You want Semyon Varlamov coming off of a serious lower body injury. You want 40-year-old Jonathan Quick. Do you really want Alexander Georgiev? Like, there are goalies available, but none of these guys are good. None of those guys are worth the assets you would have to give up to go and acquire them to bring them in here. There's no guarantee that changing the environment for the better would make them better. Do I think Alexander Georgiev is as bad as he played last year in San Jose and Colorado? No, I don't. But you're going to have a hard time convincing a larger fan base and the guys on that team that he's better than what they presently have. And it's a real fine line the Oilers are walking right now. I don't think you're pissing McDavid off, but I do think there is a small voice in his head that's probably a little curious about the situation elsewhere, if the grass maybe is greener somewhere else. But that will do it for our overarching conversation about goaltending at large and what the Oilers could potentially do. Thank you so much to everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team, the Edmonton Oilers, covered every single day. We're back to 5 days a week next week. I look forward to getting season preview content ramped up. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Oilers wherever you get your podcast. Leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Subscribe over on YouTube. We had 2,500 subscribers. Thank you so much to everybody who has gotten on board in the last year and change since I took over. We have tripled the subscriber count here on the YouTube channel, and I am so grateful to everybody who has hit that button, everybody who has watched an episode or listened to an episode while you've made dinner, done the dishes, worked out. However you consume the show, thank you, thank you, thank you. Without you guys, I don't get to do this. So take a moment and yes, thank you. I can't use what I was about to say because that would be trademark or copyright infringement, but you guys are the best. I greatly appreciate you. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.